Hello and welcome to another A-to-Plane Philosopher video with Jonathan M.S. Pierce. This is a quick run through the front line, or I hope it's quick. You know me though, if you've been with me along this journey. So let's have a little look at what's been happening overnight. Well, Mykolaiv, Zaporizhzhia hit S-300 missiles. There's also the usual shelling, so I don't talk about this enough probably, but Mahanets and Nikopol get hit by shelling quite consistently. These are really important towns, industrially speaking. Manganese ore, I think it is, and other sort of mining capabilities there that are really important to the economy. They are getting consistently hit. So that's not good for the Ukrainians. I'll end up talking about Kherson because there's still quite a lot to talk about there. There has been some grad attacks in the Sumy area from across the border from Russia, which is interesting. So actually a more concerted effort at hitting something there. So that again, it makes you wonder what the intentions are for the Russians. Is it just to keep the Ukrainians on their feet, to fix some forces in the area so they don't they can't go down and help out on the other fronts? I don't know, but that's what's going on. Let's have a look at some of the figures. The Ukrainian figures for Russian liquidated personnel is now over 80,000. So another 810 according to them yesterday, which is a massive figure. Both of those figures are big. Even if so, these are Ukrainian figures, overinflated quite possibly. There'll be rough estimates anyway, because you can't count very accurately the amount of people that are dying in an artillery attack unless you're on the ground, counting the bodies. You don't know who's dead and who's injured. So these are going to be hugely rough estimates anyway. But even if we take a quarter off, okay, so let's take 25% off that 60,000. At a 3 to 4 to 1 ratio of, let's say 3 to 1 to be conservative, wounded out of action to those 80,000. Although this has gone on now for 7 months plus 8 months, so you will have people coming back into fighting who have been injured previously. So it is a rough estimate, but let's say 3 to 1. So you've got 60 times 3 is 180,000, plus the 60,000 dead. That's 240,000. Okay, that's the forces that they brought. That's the entire forces that they brought into Russia, which is into Ukraine, which is why they've had to mobilize, etc., etc. So even if these are hugely overinflated, these are still massively high figures that will be causing huge problems back at home in Russia. Body bags coming back, families, all sorts. So these figures are bad. Now let's look at the huge uptick that we've seen in the mechanized equipment. So tanks, 24 tanks, 34 APCs, 12 artillery systems, only one UAV drone, 20 other vehicles, and one piece of special equipment. So this is going to be as a result of Kherson. There's quite a lot of equipment being found in Kherson, but not nearly as much as one would hope, and I'll come on to that a little bit later. So here's the Grad or the MLRS rocket system attacking Sumy. Defmon says Ukraine have had 3 huge victories since September the 1st. During the same time, the Russians have captured Pisky. The total so it's a tiny village, that is insignificant compared to what Ukraine has achieved. The total liberated area since September 1st should end up at around 17,000 square kilometers, with the area west of Dnipro. Okay, let's go to our front lines and see what is going on. So we go up to the northeast, which is the Kupiansk down to Svatove, down to Kreminna, and we have not a lot of change, although there is some interesting movement around Kuzmivka. Kuzmivka appears to be under attack. So here's Svatove and Kupiansk up there, and this is the area that has been particularly hotly contested, because if you break through here, then if the Ukrainians break through here, then they are able to start the encirclement of Svatove, because they won't want to take it head on. So Kuzmivka has been the kind of target, I would guess, over and above other places. Firing Kuzmivka. So here's a bit of evidence that Kuzmivka is under attack directly. And there's fighting going on there. Apparently, the Ukrainians are attacking the town. Locals report fighting in Novoselivka, Kuzmivka, and Volodymyrivka. They also claim that Russian forces have retreated about 700 meters from their positions in that area, leaving the towns behind, which are now liberated by the Ukrainian forces. We need visual confirmation, though. So this is really interesting. So this is, if that's true, then Kuzmivka could well be under under Ukrainian control, as well as this town up here, Volodymyrivka. So that would be pretty important for the Ukrainians. So these two towns, and then a movement on 700 meters back for the Russians. Finally, a bit of movement on this axis. We will see. I haven't moved my lines because, again, it needs to be visually confirmed. It's a bit speculative at the moment, but certainly good news for the Ukrainians, because they have made this really slow. Well, they haven't made it. It is tough going here because this is the weather is not working in their favor. The mud, the Russians are dug in. They've had mobilized troops. It is tough. So some good news there. So yesterday, Ukraine repelled lots of ground attacks in Kharkiv and Luhansk. So all these places I always mention, just constant, and it's kind of what I said yesterday, which is just constant attacks both ways, counterattacks, attacks. Both sides are consistently attacking. Apparently, there is forces amassing near Svatove-Kreminna. So the Ukrainians are amassing forces there. You would assume ready for a punch across the P66 highway. That's been, a threat for so long, but not much else. The one thing that is worth noting is, and this is from the Russians, the military bloggers, saying they're either hitting Ukrainians as they're doing this, or they're reporting that they're doing this, which is a rotation of forces. So the Ukrainians are consistently rotating forces. So they're rotating forces around Pilshany up there, and also down here in this Torsky-Terny area. So they are rotating forces all the time here, and that is good. This is what you should be doing, because troops can only last so long without getting exhausted and needing to refresh themselves, recuperate, reconstitute, and get back in there. So they are doing that over here. They are using their reinforcements in the proper way, to have a rotation of forces here. I don't know that the Russians are doing this. You've got people that have probably been fighting since February in certain places, non-stop, without proper rotation. And that can only be bad for the Russian forces. The Ukrainians are doing the correct kind of, doctrine, if you like, for how to fight wars effectively. Okay, let's come down to Bilohorivka. Still under a lot of effort, a lot of threat around there. If we go up to what the Institute for the Study of War say of the area, it is just basically a whole lot of attacks and counterattacks. So we go down to Bilohorivka. It says, they are repelling counterattacks around there. What is interesting for me, though, is this. Ukrainian forces continuing to target Russian logistics in Luhansk Oblast on November 11th. The Luhansk People's Republic, LNR, People's Militia, claimed on November 11th that Ukrainian forces struck Khedivka, Artemivsk, Krynichny, which is somewhere I can't find on the map. There's a mine near there, Svatove and Lysychansk, with 18 HIMARS rockets. And Bars 13 combat reserve representative amplified a claim that LNR People's Militia officer stating that Ukrainian forces intensified shelling on industrial enterprises in Luhansk Oblast, including a coal mine in Krynichny, a construction company in Khedivka, and a concrete plant in Svatove. Now, you can bet your bottom dollar that those aren't those things. They're not going to be hitting the long-term industrial capabilities of the region. They're going to be hitting some kind of military target that will be stored there. But these are areas that are in this kind of area, in this kind of range. and they're hitting places obviously fairly strategically, softening up, and you've got this constant activity of HIMARS. I wonder whether, or I wonder where even, the HIMARS that are pulled out from their operation in and around Kherson, because they were pretty active around here, whether they will just move further forward and start hitting areas here, or whether you will start seeing some HIMARS being brought up into this area where it's pretty difficult for the Ukrainians at the moment, or even up to the Svatove-Kreminna axis. So anyway, stuff going on behind the lines. As we come further down, it looks pretty interesting, for at least as far as the Russian sources are concerned, for the Ukrainians around this southern Bilohorivka in the Donetsk area. So I told you yesterday how the Russians had moved in and occupied or controlled probably about half the southern part of Bilohorivka, and now there's claims that the Russians are moving to the north of Bilohorivka. So this is a Russian source saying this is where they have the line saying that Vesely is coming under pressure. Then you've got Berestove that is under Russian control. So I don't have that on my map, but here Berestove, I've got it as a grey area, neither side controlling, but perhaps the Russians are all the way over here as they're attacking Vesely, perhaps, and completely encircling Bilohorivka. Or at least attempting to. So that is not looking particularly good for the Ukrainians there. So then we come further down south to our good friend Bakhmut. Again, really heavy fighting going on all around Bakhmut. Now, I've got this large grey area here, and this is the asphalt plant down here. I'm pretty sure it's that one. It gets confusing because there are different sort of plants and industrial, complexes around here doing different things. There's a cement factory and an asphalt plant, and I did get confused once. This, I think, is the asphalt plant, and apparently I've done a bit of geolocating myself, so it's almost certainly inaccurate, but there you go. So this here, this complex and that road going up there does very much look like this complex and the road going up there. Okay, so that's that main road going up there and this complex. Now I'll show you a little video to show that in and around here there had been shelling of Russian trenches, but it didn't look like there were anyone in the trenches, and then it looks like Ukrainian troops then following in behind. And this is, oops, wrong one. So in Bakhmut, the fighting is hard, but the AFU still advances in some parts. After the artillery bombardment of the Russian positions, the fighters of the 71st Hunter Brigade went to attack them. There was almost no resistance. Positions are occupied. It says there, I think that means occupied by the Ukrainians now, Bakhmut asphalt plant area. Okay, so this is it. I've turned the sound off. No, I haven't. Ah, damn it. It turns it back on all the time. So as you can see, they are shelling around this plant area. You can see the destruction of these particular places. And the artillery is hammering in and around the area. Can't see much activity from humans, from any kind of mechanized units. But there you go. And then we see these sort of trenches. The movement is actually trees. So I think these trenches are not, I don't think there's anyone in them. So they get repeated hits by artillery. I don't think so. I was looking, I couldn't see any movement or anything. And then afterwards, as they get repeatedly hit, you then see what looks like Ukrainian troops, coming in to check it out and then occupying what's left over, one presumes. So that is all happening around this area. I mean, it could be, as far away as here, somewhere around here. It looks like now Ukrainians are somewhat in control. But again, I can't be any more accurate now. It's just to show that as that's also saying, Ukrainians are making some advances in the area. But on the flip side, all you need to do is come down here, and apparently the Russians are putting really heavy pressure on Opitne from Ivangrad still. So, that's not far, and yet on the one hand, Russia apparently are making advances here, and Ukrainian are making advances there. So, it gives with one hand, takes with the other. As we come down south from Opitne, we come to Maiorsk. And this is a railway station that is really hotly contested. this is what the Russians claim at the moment. This is Rybar saying a Russian forces offensive on Maiorsk resulted in them establishing control over the town's railway station, industrial park, and part of the built-up area. The Ukrainians set up a defense in the remaining parts of town. So they are now broadly making claims on advancing further into Maiorsk and having control over the railway station as a whole. I'll wait for further confirmation of that, but if that's true, that's not good news for the Ukrainians because that's quite a key area tactically for them. As we come further down south, we come towards Avdivka. And again, we've got huge pressure from the south, Opitny, the ISW, admitting that Russians claim to control Opitny, but that the Ukrainians are repelling everywhere else. But I think this is, a really difficult area down here for the Ukrainians. And this is a Pisky sort of joke that Definite Mom was saying that the Russians have captured Pisky in the time that the Ukrainians have taken 3 massive victories, taking 17,000 square kilometers, and Russia have, a small village. Let's go down further. So Marinka still under a lot of pressure. We're going to come down to Pavlivka. Russians claim to control Pavlivka, as we can see from claims here. So final visual confirmation, says a Russian source, that Pavlivka is under Russian control. So here's the map, and here's the video confirmation of Russian forces. You can hear the boom of the artillery and all sorts. Oh, feeding a dog. Very kind of them. So that is a visual confirmation that at least troops are in Pavlivka. Quite whether they definitely control the entirety of it is hard to say, but it could well be the case. But it's not an easy place to hold. And as I keep mentioning, there's an elevated position in Fukledar where they can just hammer down on Pavlivka, and it kind of back and forth, back and forth. Okay, so that's where we are. Not too dissimilar from yesterday, but challenging for the Russian force, for the Ukrainian forces in a good number of those places. I have taken away I haven't yet taken away. I was just going to show you what this looks like. So, bing, there you go. It's now all Ukrainian. So that's a huge difference to make to the amount of territory that the Ukrainians control. The question now is, where do the troops on both sides go? So what do I have to say about Kherson? That's what Warmapper makes it look like. A few areas maybe of bit of contestation there, if that's a word. Ukrainian forces captured at least one fully operational S-300 air defense system in the Kherson region. There is rumored to be more abandoned. That would be really, really good. However, my claim is this. The Russian withdrawal of Kherson is probably the most successful thing they've done this whole military campaign. It really was pretty successful in terms of the troops that they've got off there. I've hardly seen any, if at all any, footage of Russian troops being captured or indeed killed, anything like that. I'm sure stuff will come out. And as far as equipment is concerned, most of the equipment that is being captured, and there is a substantial amount of equipment, I suppose, but a lot of it is either A, blown up already, B, damaged so it can't move, or C, in some other way inoperable, not working. So that most of the equipment the Ukrainians are capturing is stuff that's been left behind because they can't move it. Most of it, and some other would have been abandoned, but there's very little that has been actively captured off other people. And it's not, I don't think, the extent of equipment or the sheer numbers of equipment they would have hoped for at the, when pro-Ukrainians were talking about Kherson, being taken and death by 1,000 cuts, and then a sweeping, liberation of the whole area. Actually, Russia has successfully gotten almost all of their troops off and most of their equipment by the looks of it. Recaptured Ukrainian helicopter in Kherson airport. This is really good news, but then actually I think that helicopter had been there for an awful long time and it's possibly not operational. So yeah, that's good, and they could probably get it working, but that's been there. That hasn't been used for an awful long time. So this is what Defmon says. This retreat most likely started in mid-October. I believe the Russians executed a retreat successfully with minimal losses. I get a lot of questions about the Russian retreat. Why would they announce the retreat before they leave? Why would they announce it on TV? Here's what I believe. The retreat has been going on for weeks. There is only a small number of troops left east of the river, mostly lower valued units like Mobics and others. Some will most likely be sacrificed to cover the retreat of the last units. Announcing it on TV gives the Russian leadership a chance to save face. Kadyrov and Prigozhin immediately came with a statement saying Svatove-Kreminna was very brave and that he saved a lot of Russian lives. So this is about managing the expectations and managing this from a PR point of view. This announcement was purely for domestic propaganda. They can now say they saved thousands of Russians' lives. They did not lose the fight in Kherson, but they decided to leave, on their terms, because fighting against NATO would just be too costly. As a side note, I think the attack in Kerch Bridge played a huge role in this, and probably why we see them trying so hard around Pavlivka. So that's I would broadly agree with that. This has not been smooth. Ukraine have had a high losses in Kherson, and it's been a very difficult area to advance in. The terrain is not optimal, and the Russian forces in Kherson had actually done a good job digging in. And he's got lots of evidence to support that claim that he's done over the last month or so. This is far from complete. But there you go. Lots more to say on that. It just would have been really, really tough for the Ukrainians to have taken that without the Russians actually fully withdrawing. So on and so forth. That's a very interesting thread, but I've talked for long enough already. So this has left the Russians thinking and starting to question certain things. So Russian channels are starting asking reasonable questions about the 87% support of the referendum in Kherson. So this is what a Russian source says. Residents of Kherson did not evacuate and welcomed the armed forces of Ukraine. According to our data, 80 to 100,000 did not want to go to the left bank, where we were sending them humanitarianly. Even didn't want to get to the sanatoriums of Anapa. The curators of new regions regularly put on Putin's table reports of the colossal support for Russia by the population of Kherson, as well as all other new territories. So this is where cognitive dissonance comes in. It's like, I've got this core belief that everyone in Kherson really supported Russia. Here's a bunch of evidence that supports that contradicts this claim. What happens in my brain when these two things come together? These reports substantiated the success of the referenda. What are the results of the referendum on September the 22nd to 27th in Kherson? 87.05% in the Kherson region. Can't really see that. It's just so unanimous. There are fakes everywhere. How long can you be drawing lies? And how many resources are spent on organizing this lie? And this comes. So if you think 87.05% of people voted in support of Russia, controlling Kherson, how do you explain this? And this is a question to all pro-Russians in threads below. So is that just the 13% of the entire 13% of the population that were not in support of Russia, or were those figures lies? Other things to note. Interesting update. 1 week ago, this is from someone who's got relatives out there. 1 week ago, the Russians began to flood Baltazarivka village next to Chaplinka and began forcing Ukrainians out of their homes. Today, my mother-in-law says they all left the village running. This is less than 20 kilometers from Crimea. Is Russia retreating back to Crimea? And then there are other claims that are similar to this. It seems this post earlier may well have added importance. A Ukraine resistance movement says it has sources confirming Russia will evacuate its people from Novokhovka tomorrow, Saturday, sending them close to the border with Crimea. So, they're taking flags down in Novokhovka, doing the same sort of things they were doing in Kherson before they retreated from Kherson, and this is Novokhovka. So could they be, and we were also hearing that they're building up defenses and trenches and Dragon's Teeth and all those kind of things, I think, in Crimea. So are they thinking that the Ukrainians will make a bid for Crimea. And are they retreating? Is this organizational withdrawal, organized withdrawal, operational withdrawal, going to continue further back from Kherson into the Crimea district? I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see, but the Russians are certainly, preparing for that eventuality if it does come. Perhaps they're just being overly cautious. I don't know. So it could be that you see a withdrawal further from the Dnipro River. But as well, the Russians are still saying, as the ISW claimed today, that they fear an attack from Zaporizhzhia downwards. And this is what a lot of people are saying now is that, but again, see, this is where I think the liberation of Kherson isn't as successful as people think. Because you've now got 20 to 40,000 Russian troops able to be used elsewhere. Yes, they will need to take time to reconstitute. But really what you wanted to do is fix them in there and have an attack down from Zaporizhzhia down to Mariupol, Melitopol, Berdyansk, any of those, with these Russian troops and equipment being fixed in here. Now they're out there, they can go and support all these lines, and any kind of attack is going to be more difficult. The further thing I'm going to say before I finish is that I was questioning yesterday why there isn't this concentrated single attack around a certain area. So let's take Bakhmut for a random reason, just arbitrarily. So why are the Russians just consistently attacking all along this front and spreading themselves too thin and not having a huge advantage in order to punch through in one particular place? And someone was saying, Tara English was saying, amongst many other people, very good points, that there isn't a cohesion in the Russian forces. So what you have here is you have the Wagner PMC fighting mainly around here, but then you've got the LNR, the Luhansk People's Republic, fighting up here, and then you've got the DPR, the Donetsk People's Republic, fighting around here, and then you've also got Russian units, but then you've got naval infantry brigades, VDV, and then you've got Spetsnaz, and then you've got mobilized troops, and basically you've got no cohesion. And even though you have this idea that the Russian forces are one hierarchical unit working to this very tight command structure, and not like the NATO forces that work in enfranchising the NCOs and the officers further down the kind of hierarchical structure. On the one hand, you've got this very tight single command structure in the Russian army, but on the other hand, it's completely almost dysfunctional. Disjunctive. There's just these pieces all over the shop doing almost individual things. So it's like a big contradiction. And you have these kind of district generals or generals of particular areas, and you really need a much more cohesive command structure that is looking at the whole picture and saying, right, what do we need as one cohesive unit to work to maximize our successes in this whole area, but maybe concentrating in one or two areas. But instead, you've got the DPR doing something, the LPR doing something, the Wagner PMC doing something, and doing it for different reasons. So they're doing it for money and not to go back to prison. So they've got completely different objectives in mind. Perhaps it's just about gaining certain amounts of territory for an amount of money rather than being sort of tactical or strategic more. And then you have these other Russian units and brigades and BTGs, battalion tactical groups, not singing to the same song sheet. And this is why the Russians have utterly failed, where really, on paper, they should have succeeded to a much greater extent than they have. But I'm just afraid that the Russians will have a whole bunch of troops and a lot of equipment, if not all. They haven't got all of it, but they've got a good deal of equipment out of Kherson, able to be put into use somewhere else. And I think this is a lost opportunity for the Ukrainians, because anywhere they attack now, there will be, more Russian troops available to defend. Unless they do it sort of straight away now. It just seems that this is great that Kherson has been liberated, but Russia have come out as this as well as they possibly could have. You're always going to lose troops and you're always going to lose equipment withdrawing, right? It's always going to happen. So we're going to see lots of images of Russian equipment being captured or destroyed, Russian equipment, but they've got out as best as they possibly could, I think. If you disagree, let me know. Anyway, thanks for all your support. I will try and get out Ukraine War Update extra video later. In the meantime, please like, subscribe, share, and do all that stuff. And thank you very much. Goodbye.